What if the most powerful man of the 20th century was once the least impressive person in the room? No grand speeches, no magnetic charisma, no heroic image, just a quiet figure, watching. Joseph Stalin did not rise like a storm. He rose like a shadow. Born in Georgia, far from the imperial center of power, he grew up in poverty, instability, and strict discipline. His early life shaped one core belief: control equals survival. As a young revolutionary, he wasn't the loudest voice in the Bolshevik movement. That role belonged to others: Trotsky, Lenin, intellectuals, and theorists. Stalin organized. He managed. He built networks. He learned something critical. Power is not won in public. It is built in private. When Lenin appointed him general secretary in 1922, it seemed administrative, boring even. But that position allowed him to choose who advanced, who was transferred, who was trusted. And loyalty became currency. When Lenin's health declined, a struggle began beneath the surface. Lenin reportedly warned about Stalin's growing influence, but the machinery was already in motion. After Lenin's death in 1924, everyone expected Trotsky to dominate. He didn't. Stalin formed alliances, first with Zinoviev and Kamenev, then against them. He outmaneuvered rivals patiently. No dramatic coup, just isolation. One by one, competitors lost position, influence, protection. By the late 1920s, Stalin stood alone. But here's the real turning point. He didn't just defeat rivals. He eliminated the possibility of future rivals. And that decision would define everything that followed. Once secure, Stalin moved fast. The Soviet Union was still largely agricultural. He wanted industry, heavy industry, steel, coal, machinery. The 5-year plans were launched. Factories appeared almost overnight. Entire cities rose from empty land. Workers flooded industrial centers. Production numbers exploded. On paper, it was extraordinary. But speed has consequences. Collectivization of agriculture forced millions into a new system. Private farms disappeared. The state took control of grain. Resistance was crushed. The countryside changed forever. But here's what's often overlooked. Stalin truly believed he was racing against time. He once stated that the Soviet Union was decades behind Western powers and had to catch up within 10 years, or be crushed. That fear of external threat justified extreme internal pressure. And then came the 1930s. This was the decade of paranoia. High-ranking officials were suddenly accused of disloyalty. Military commanders faced investigations. Political elites lived in constant uncertainty. No one felt secure. Even those closest to Stalin understood one thing: access to power did not mean protection. Was this about eliminating threats? Or was it about controlling perception? Because by the late 1930s, there were no independent centers of influence left. Everything flowed through him. But absolute control creates a dangerous side effect: isolation. And isolation distorts judgment. That would become clear in 1941. June 1941, Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in modern history. Despite warnings from intelligence sources, Stalin hesitated to believe it. Why? Because acknowledging it meant admitting vulnerability. The first weeks were catastrophic. Entire divisions collapsed. Cities fell rapidly. For a brief moment, Stalin disappeared from public view. Was he overwhelmed? Was he calculating his next move? Historians still debate that silence. But what followed was one of the most massive mobilizations ever seen. Factories were dismantled and moved east. Production continued beyond the reach of invading forces. The Red Army absorbed devastating losses, but regrouped. Stalingrad, Kursk, relentless resistance. By 1945, Soviet forces entered Berlin. Victory transformed Stalin's image, from feared internal leader to global superpower architect. The Soviet Union emerged as a central force in world politics. Eastern Europe shifted. The Cold War began to form. But success brought new tension. Post-war, Stalin trusted even fewer people. War had shown how fragile control could be. He tightened it again. Late-night meetings became routine. Officials waited for hours. One misplaced word could end a career. And in his final years, his suspicion intensified. New investigations were launched. Internal cases reopened. Was he preparing another restructuring of power? Or did he sense instability within his circle? Because by 1952, the atmosphere in the Kremlin was heavy. The man who had once feared external invasion now seemed to fear those sitting at his own table. And then came March 1953. March 1st, 1953. Stalin hosted dinner with senior officials at his residence. They talked late. They laughed. Or at least, they appeared to. After midnight, the gathering ended. He went to his private quarters. Morning came. No movement, no signal. In Stalin's system, entering his room uninvited was unthinkable. Hours passed. Eventually, staff entered. He was found on the floor, unresponsive. Here is where the story becomes unsettling. Medical help did not arrive immediately. Why? Fear of acting without orders? Or hesitation born from years of uncertainty? Doctors were eventually called. He lingered for days. His closest associates stood nearby. Men who had built careers under his authority. Men who had lived carefully around him for decades. On March 5th, 1953, he died. Officially, a stroke. Unofficially, questions remain. Was it natural? Was it simply the end of an aging leader? Or did his own system of fear prevent timely action? We cannot prove darker theories, but we can examine the irony. A leader who demanded immediate obedience did not receive immediate response when he needed it most. The empire did not collapse that night. But something shifted. Because the fear that held it together began to fade. After his death, his inner circle moved quickly. Policies changed. Some decisions were reversed. A few years later, his successor publicly criticized aspects of his rule. This moment shocked the Soviet elite, because for decades, his authority had seemed untouchable. Statues stood tall, portraits hung everywhere, history books were shaped carefully. But over time, perspectives evolved. Today, Stalin remains one of the most debated figures in modern history. To some, he represents industrial transformation and wartime leadership. To others, he symbolizes rigid control and political repression. Both views exist. Both are argued passionately. But here is the deeper question. Can a nation rise through fear alone? Or does fear eventually weaken the structure it builds? Stalin believed discipline was strength. He believed centralized control ensured survival, and in many ways he reshaped global power dynamics. But in the end, his final hours reflected the world he had constructed. Careful, silent, hesitant, power without warmth, authority without trust. He ruled an empire that stretched across continents. Yet his final moments were marked not by command, but by delay. History rarely gives simple answers, but it gives patterns. And Stalin's story leaves us with one powerful reflection. Absolute control may secure authority, but it cannot guarantee loyalty in the final hour. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. if you want more deep, intense historical breakdowns like this. Subscribe to the channel. Because the next story might challenge everything you think you know.